right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a pretty fascinating look, I think, at some real wisdom. We're diving into Surah Luqman.
Okay.
This is the 31st chapter of the Quran,
Interesting.
and it's a Meccan revelation with 34 verses, and it comes from the middle period of the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, mission. So a lot to unpack there, I think, but some pretty profound insights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what's really remarkable about Surah Luqman is that it really does address these really fundamental aspects of faith. And it covers things like the oneness of God,
Yeah,
right? The concept of prophethood. It covers the reality of the hereafter. So, it's got a lot in there. And a good portion of the surah, verses 12 through 19, is actually, dedicated to the advice of a wise man, a man called Luqman. And it's his advice to his son. So it's fascinating stuff.
That's super interesting. So let's talk about that, right? So
Yeah.
the whole goal today is to really unpack Luqman's teachings and how they apply to us, to the listener,
Right.
What can we actually pull out of this ancient wisdom that we can use today in our lives for personal growth, ethical growth, spiritual growth, all that good stuff?
I think that's a really great goal. And just thinking about, who Luqman was, it's interesting, right? So he was blessed with this divine wisdom. And this is a gift that's very explicitly linked to gratitude. You actually see this within the surah itself. So Luqman, while most scholars don't consider him to be a prophet, he's definitely seen as this really righteous individual. And he was potentially, of humble origins, and was granted this exceptional wisdom. There's even some narrations out there that suggest that he actually chose wisdom over prophethood out of his humility. And so I think it's really interesting that he's actually included in the Quran, right? It kind of elevates him to this level of a universal guide. And so his wisdom is something that we can definitely all benefit from. Wow. Okay, well, let's dive in then. Let's get into the bedrock of faith, Tawhid, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
The absolute oneness of Allah. And Luqman's, very first instruction to his son in verse 13 is so direct. He says, "Oh, my dear son, do not associate anything with Allah. Indeed, association with him is a great injustice."
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting there is how direct and really how strong that statement is, right? Like he doesn't mince words. He's just like, this is the biggest injustice.
Yeah.
Right? Shirk, which is the act of associating anything with Allah, is like, it's described as this huge wrong. And it's not just like a theological error, right? It's something that's seen as like deeply damaging to the individual. And so the surah really establishes this real strong idea that Allah is absolutely one. And he's unique in every way, in his being and his attributes and his actions.
And I think, if you really think about that, right? Like if you truly believe that only Allah has this ultimate power, then things like the fear of other people's judgment, the need to constantly seek the approval of others, it kind of lessens, right? Like it's not as important. And that can actually lead to a really deep sense of like inner freedom.
That makes sense. That's really interesting. I never thought about it that way before. But okay, so then the surah beautifully transitions into this crucial bond with parents, right?
Right.
Like verse 14 highlights the mother's sacrifices and, weakness upon weakness, it says, and the long period of weaning. And then it brings it right back to Allah and says, be grateful to me and to your parents. So fascinating. Yeah, it's a beautiful connection that it's making there. And I think, what's really being laid down here is this fundamental principle, right? And that principle is that showing honor to your parents, it's a primary obligation. It's like the second most important thing that you can do, second only to worshiping Allah. And what's also really interesting is how it specifically mentions the mother's struggles. And that really emphasizes like the profound depth of our debt to them.
Yeah, that's so true. But I also want to ask, like, what about those situations where, like, family beliefs differ, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what happens there?
That's a really good question. And actually, verse 15 kind of gets into that, right? It talks about this area that can sometimes be a little bit sensitive. And it basically advises that if your parents are urging you toward shirk, then you shouldn't obey them in that specific respect. But it also says that you should still treat them with kindness, especially in worldly matters. And you should really follow the path of those who turn to Allah. So it's a really important point about maintaining that balance. The surah is giving us this nuanced directive, right? Upholding Tawhid, right? Upholding that principle of the oneness of Allah as paramount, but at the same time stressing the importance of preserving those family ties,
Mm.
and treating your parents with respect, even when there are differences in beliefs. So it's really about prioritizing your spiritual principles,
Right.
but without, like breaking those essential human connections.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful, actually. So, next Luqman kind of changes gears and goes into this profound awareness of Allah's knowledge, like his all-encompassing knowledge, right? In verse 16, he says, even an act of wrongdoing as small as a mustard seed hidden in a rock or anywhere, Allah will bring it forth. Indeed, he is subtle and acquainted. Like, wow.
To just think about the image that brings to mind, right? Like a mustard seed, that's so tiny. And the idea that Allah is aware of even that, no matter how well you think you've hidden it, it really instills this sense of like deep accountability. Yeah. And then you have the term subtle, which I think is really fascinating because it suggests that Allah knows even your most hidden intentions. Like those things that you might not even be fully aware of yourself. And then you have the word acquainted, which emphasizes that he's not just watching. It's not just that he sees everything, it's that he understands. He understands everything. Like he understands the nuances. He understands the motivations behind all of our actions. And I think, this is a really, really powerful message for the listener, right? Because it encourages you to cultivate this mindfulness in your actions and not just your outward actions, but also what's going on inside.
Right. Right. And this all ties back into the concept of accountability on the day of judgment too, right? Like nothing is hidden.
Absolutely. Like that understanding that there's this divine omniscience should really make you stop and think. It should guide your choices,
Yeah.
It should strengthen your moral compass, I think, in every aspect of your life.
Totally, totally. So finally, let's get into this idea of humility, right?
Yeah.
Verse 18 states, do not turn your cheek in contempt toward people, and do not walk through the earth exultantly. Indeed, Allah does not like everyone self-deluded and boastful. So good.
I love that verse. It's so powerful. And it really captures both like the outward stuff that we do when we're being arrogant and then that inner reality of arrogance, right? Like it's not just about how you present yourself to other people. It's also about the pride that's in your heart.
Yeah.
And humility is so important. Islamic teachings really, really value humility. And I think that this verse is just a really clear instruction to avoid any kind of self-importance.
Yeah. So, in essence, what we see here is that Surah Luqman gives us this roadmap, right? It's centered on the absolute oneness of Allah, Tawhid. It's centered on this deep gratitude and kindness towards parents. It's about being aware of Allah's vast knowledge and about being humble.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that these aren't just like theoretical ideas, right? This is practical stuff. This is about how to live a more ethical life, a more meaningful life, and just a more spiritually rich life.
That's a great point. So to all our listeners out there, here's something to think about. Consider how even applying just one of these pieces of ancient wisdom, how it could really change your daily life, your daily interactions, your inner world. Which one of these lessons from Luqman, from this incredible wise man, which one really speaks to you right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for everyone to ponder.
All right. Well, until next time.
See you then.
Take care.
Take care.